All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome everyone to the University Career Center's Professional Preparation Workshop Series workshop on transitioning to the workplace from college to career. We're excited to have each of you join us this afternoon for what we believe will be a really important conversation for each of you from some really special guests whom we're welcoming back to campus virtually to join us to share their wisdom and knowledge with us. Just so you are aware, the session will be recorded, so you can use your camera or not as you feel comfortable. As questions arise, we welcome you to put them in the chat, and as appropriate, we'll ask during the course of the conversation, and we'll definitely save some time at the end of some of the prepared questions for Q&A. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists for you this afternoon. I'm just going to do a brief bio of what you see on the screen, and then I'll give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about their work and their organization. So first, I'll introduce Ilea Burke, who is a senior consultant and human resource specialist at Booz Allen. And she was here on campus not too long ago in her master's program for industrial and organizational psychology. I will then also like to introduce Evelyn Scherf. Welcome back to campus. She's a recruiter and HR generalist for Pathfinder International. She's a graduate of the class of 2015 and studied family science and human development. And then last but not least, Joel Vasquez, who serves as a senior talent manager and diversity and inclusion specialist for Venture for America. He graduated from campus in 2016 and got multiple degrees, both in American Studies and Government and Politics, and also minored in Spanish and Public Leadership. So I welcome each of you to our panel this evening. So I'll unshare my screen and then ask that each of you would take a moment to introduce yourselves. Give us a little bit about your current work, your current organization, and maybe one of your favorite things of your time here on campus before we dig in.
Okay, so I'll start. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Ilea Burke. I currently work for Booz Allen Hamilton as a senior consultant doing human resource specialist work. I've done some survey work, so survey development as well as reporting. I have worked on competencies, so some of the things that you'll see in job descriptions, and my latest work has pivoted towards more of that transactional HR piece for hiring and recruiting. My job right now, very thankful, you know, with COVID-19 and everything, I have been able to kind of flex and do a hybrid of working from home as well as be on the client site. And I've been really enjoying it so far, since this is kind of like my first job outside of academia. And my favorite piece actually of being on campus was well, there's two parts. So I had a very close-knit master's program that I was a part of that really gave me that solid Maryland experience, which is why I actually love Maryland a little bit more than my alma mater. And also working at the Career Center and being able to service students, helping them with their resumes and helping them craft what they would like to look like and showcase for themselves, you know, once they step out into their professional world. And so that was one of my favorite things of being on campus.
Hi, everyone. My name is Evelyn. I am a recruiter and HR generalist at Pathfinder International. That's a reproductive health rights organization. It's an NGO based in DC, and we are based in 17 different countries around the world. Currently, as a recruiter, I am helping with the recruiting in the US as well as globally for different positions internally. And as an HR generalist, I'm supporting my HR manager on various items like employee changes, promotions, any sort of organizational change. I started this position last December, so I'm coming up on a year and, feeling the same way, very grateful for my job during this time and being able to work remotely from home. And during this pandemic, I've hired and onboarded about 17 to 18 people so far. So it's been intense, but it's been good. Oh, and one of my favorite things about being at University of Maryland is actually, funny enough, same thing, working at the Career Center. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on a career panel, but I really enjoyed being a PCE. It gave me really great exposure to understanding, career related items. And I feel like that's really helped me with, where I am now. And I feel like I made some really great friends throughout that time. And I met my husband at UMD as well. So that's a cool shout out to him.
See, y'all, you heard it first here today. Love can happen at university. Kind of bouncing off that, hi everyone, my name is Joel Vasquez, pronouns he, him, and his, and similar to Elia and Evelyn, I also worked at the Career Center, so absolutely fortunate to be back here, and I am a senior talent manager focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion at a nonprofit organization called Venture for America, and what our organization does is we primarily host a fellowship program in order to build the next generation of entrepreneurs and individuals interested in the startup community. And so in terms of one favorite memory, I think this is probably one of the more difficult questions I've been asked today because I think that there are so many, but I'm definitely going to stay on brand. And in addition to, of course, I think being involved with a lot of different student activities like the Filipino Cultural Association, which is how I made a lot of my community, a lot of that was also really in line with being a peer career educator at the Career Center because it really, I think, allowed me to hone in on the kinds of values that I wanted to really find within other organizations. And so I think similar to Elia and Evelyn, very much happy to be here and looking forward to having that conversation with y'all.
Well, thank you to each of you. We appreciate that introduction, and we're going to dive right in. So because each of you are Terps and spent time on campus, we'd love to hear, kind of as we start to unpack the transition from campus to the workplace, what's one thing that prepared you well for your transition now that you're professionals in the workplace? And what's one thing from campus that you wish you would have gained or knew before you transitioned? And I'll let you all decide kind of how you'd like to go.
I'm just going to hop in there because I'm the most recent one that kind of made that transition from campus to the workplace. But I would definitely say, and again, I'm not doing this just to shout out the Career Center, but my time as a graduate assistant and working one-on-one with students, as well as creating some workshops, really enabled me to learn how to talk in front of groups as well as one-on-one in order to kind of amp up some of my communication skills. And so I think that that's one thing that Maryland prepared me well for. And even in my degree program that I was in, a lot of it was group work and a lot of it was presentations, because in a professional studies master's program, the aim is to really learn how to communicate an idea that you have and not necessarily just showcase all this expertise you have. And I feel like working in the Career Center, as well as within my program, I learned really well how to have all of the great knowledge, skills, and abilities in a way to be able to do something, but that communication piece in order to get that idea from yourself to someone else was really impactful. The one thing I do think that the school doesn't necessarily prepare you for that I wish I would have had was probably email etiquette. I
I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I need to make sure that I give them a good experience. I have to build a really good relationship so that they trust me, they trust HR. And so, I feel like at first in a new place, you don't really know what's going on. So you have to really rely on those who have been there for some time to give you some of that knowledge of the past. And then, do your best to just explain to them, I'm new here. I'm trying to understand what you're looking for. I want to support you. I want to support your team. And that way you're just kind of starting on the right foot. And over time, instead of thinking like, oh, she's just another HR person that's not going to be super helpful to me, they might think, okay, this person can actually help me with hiring for these 3 positions and finally completing my team. And so it's different, everywhere you go, because you're building relationships with your peers, with your managers, with senior managers, directors, maybe all the way up to the C level, C-suite level people. And so over the summer, I had my first experience working with our C-suite level people to hire some executive directors. And so to me, it was very nerve wracking. I've never worked with them before. And I have this thing in my head. I'm like, they're C-suite level. Oh my gosh. Like somehow I think like, oh, I got to treat it so differently. But yes, you might have to do some like white gloving with your interactions and with your, email communications and things like that. But in the end, you realize like, they're just humans like everyone else. And you're just trying to build a good relationship with them to help them support their goal. So another thing I wanted to touch on is attention to detail. So I know this is quite random, but I felt like this is a skill that I had trouble with, throughout my time in college, early on in my career, something I still work on. I'm double checking to make sure I'm dotting my I's, crossing my T's in my emails or whatever my work products are. And then somehow I still miss something. But back to what Joel said, that constructive feedback of, hey, maybe you should have, triple checked this a bit to make sure it's perfect. You got to take that in and make sure you're doing that next time. And so I continue to grow in that skill to just, make sure everything is perfect, even if sometimes you're working on it and you're like, I've looked at it enough. I think it's good. But then maybe you take a break and you come back and make sure it's perfect before you send it to your boss or a senior director above your boss. So that's something I find that, all my hiring managers are looking for in terms of their candidates when we're hiring, no matter what the role is, whether they're an executive director or they're an admin assistant, because no matter what you touch, you're doing these email communications with your peers, with higher level ups, and you have to have those perfect emails and you can't make these mistakes over and over again. So those are the 2 skills that I wanted to talk about.
Thank you all. This is more of a practical question, so maybe I'll have one of you speak to it and then we'll keep the conversation going. Can you speak to the onboarding process? Like, what does that actually mean? Because students will experience it both kind of in an internship role or kind of transitioning full time. And how has COVID impacted kind of how that plays out maybe for your organization or for new employees?
I'm happy to start on that. So at my organization, I lead the onboarding processes. So what that means is after you've signed your offer letter and you are joining the organization, there are a number of things that are happening in the background in the org and then, communicating with you as a new hire to join us. So what we're doing at Pathfinder, I'll talk pre-COVID and now during COVID, what we were doing. So for onboarding, that just means, I don't know, like the formal term definition of this, but it's just the process of getting you hired and started, getting you on board. You've started, what's your first week going to look like? What's your first month, first 3 months, those types of processes. Who are you going to meet with? How are we going to integrate you in the organization to get you settled, essentially? So prior to COVID, and we're still doing this, we prepare a new hire first week's orientation schedule. So it'll show up on your work Outlook calendar, all the meetings that you're going to, but you will get a Word document of, your meetings for every day. And these meetings entail one-on-ones with your supervisors, with your teammates, team meetings, and cross-unit type meetings of different people you would work very closely with in your job. And if it's, necessary for you to learn about other business units that you might not, have too much interaction with, we throw that in there as well so that you can start getting to know little pieces of the organization. And as you join and get to know exactly how we all work, you'll see how each business unit flows. So that is still happening. Usually we prep that as soon as the offer letter is signed, because we use, we get support from our business unit coordinators. So each business unit has an admin coordinator that supports us with that. They and their supervisor for that new hire puts that together. And there's also embedded different training. So your like conflict of interest, anti-harassment, those types of mandatory trainings that we require at the organization is floated in there, and things like that. So that's what that schedule is. And then on the first day, I have an HR meeting, HR orientation meeting, where I welcome you, talk to you about the organization, what to expect. I cover a little bit about culture here as well, and in my interviews as well, I talk about dress. At my organization, it's very business casual, maybe even more so on the casual side. And so I talk about that, telling people no need to wear suits unless you have a important meeting you need to dress up for, and what to expect at work, the different going over that schedule of the different meetings you'll go to. And I will specifically point out that this might be a notebook meeting where you need to take some notes. There's like mandatory trainings on like how procurement works at the organization and things like that, how to do your timesheets. So everything you need to know to be an employee. And so typically prior to starting, I send paperwork. So your tax forms, emergency contact, and things like that. Prior to COVID, it used to be just, the weekend before you start on a Monday. But now that everything's virtual, I send that out about a week in advance, because I need to collect all of that stuff, process it, input it in our HR system. And there's some other sort of logistics that I need to deal with, including working with our admin team and our IT team to send you a laptop. And so that usually is about a week turnaround time. And so, standard notice is usually 2 weeks. And so I have enough time to get all of those pieces flowing. But now more and more, my candidates have been needing some more time, 3 to 4 weeks. And so it all ends up working out. And with my admin team, they need to make sure they know where they're sitting, because we have a DC office and a Watertown office in the US. And so they need to make sure they have a desk. So all those logistical things, get you a key fob to get into the office, but now you don't have to worry too much about that. And then during COVID, not only do you get a laptop, but if you need other things like a monitor, other keyboards, we get all those things handled and shipped to you as well. So that's a little bit about the logistical side of what happens at Pathfinder and what to expect in terms of onboarding. And interestingly enough, this is the most like robust onboarding that I've actually have been a part of. Both in my previous, workplaces, I show up and my computer is still not even set up. They're like, read this binder. And I'm like, okay, it's like 3 hours. And so I'm quite impressed, but I'm eager to hear from Joel and from Alaya about how you guys do it, so that, maybe I can make it better as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So thank you, Evelyn, for sharing. And I would add, like, in terms of onboarding, y'all, you can pretty much just think of it as that introductory stage where the company is pretty much introducing you to the whole organization and getting you set up in their systems so that you're equipped and ready to succeed. And so that could very often mean on Venture for America's end, really taking you through a lot of our company's mission, how that happens, some of the metrics that we set up so that we can measure our success, all the way even to different departmental meetings, so that you can kind of get a really big picture idea in terms of how each team works, what some of the pain points are, how you could potentially fit in. And I think in kind of onboarding, really use it as a way to kind of kick off building those relationships with the person that that you're onboarding with, and really treat it like an informational interview of sorts, in the sense that you're kind of getting oriented to the organization and also to that person's story and what kind of made them want to really work for that specific department and what expertise that they bring and how you can plug yourself in. And so, in addition to, of course, learning about the different business units or departments or teams within onboarding, I would really also say probably the one thing that onboarding is really supposed to do is kind of introduce also that sense of belonging. So how can individuals within the organization that you're working at make you feel welcome? And what are some of the really basic ways that oftentimes individuals can get to really know one another, and how can you get introduced to the community? At a lot of startup organizations, they often rely on Slack for communication, and oftentimes for onboarding through Slack, a lot of so that has been a lot of the goal behind boarding, and roughly similar to how my organization has done it. And it roughly differs sometimes when it comes to onboarding for our fellowship program, in that you're being onboarded in mass with other individuals and other fellows. And so for our fellowship program, it is roughly the same thing, in the sense that you're learning about the fellowship, but kind of what it entails, more of what your role is and how you can get set up for success, while also getting to meet different individuals. However, kind of the end goal of onboarding, honestly, really the basic is just kind of getting to meet different people and understanding the bigger picture behind what your organization is aiming to accomplish at the end of the day. And it is very much that stage where any question is a go, any question. We're talking about literally, I mean, pre-COVID, like where the bathroom is, to even like, where can I go for IT support and IT help? So all of that said, that was kind of a little bit about BFA's onboarding, as well as kind of big picture, what I'm kind of looking out for when I create an onboarding experience as well. How can we really introduce people to the community and make them feel like they belong?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Alea to start on this question, and then I'm going to open it up to our student audience. So if you have questions, start thinking about them, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask of our panelists. We know, right, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to organizations, but it has become more of a topic, right, in the forefront, given the rise of Black Lives Matter and all of the racial injustice that we've seen this year, kind of more nationally. And so I'm really curious, how might a new professional best understand and participate in an organization's kind of lived values around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Everyone's touting their statement, and a lot of the same language is on everyone's websites. How do students actually decipher what that means, and then fully participate in ways that are true and authentic to them? And Alea, if you want to start, and then I'll give space for others.
Absolutely. You know, earlier, Evelyn actually brought up a great point about kind of white glove servicing things when it comes to how we're communicating with higher ups, our peers, and just kind of across the organization, right? And it made me think about what it means to be authentic in the workplace. And I know personally, as a Black woman, as a person of color, and anybody who has a marginalized identity, sometimes, especially as a new professional, what does it look like for you to show up at work? Right? And I know that I can speak to my organization. I know that their DE&I efforts, especially throughout June, were very different than my clients. And I can say that because the kind of organization that I work for, I then kind of embed myself into the client space, right? And so for me, what can be a little bit difficult sometimes is deciphering what my company stands for, and then the company that I'm essentially doing work for, right? And who I'm really identifying with at that time, and how I can make efforts in both of those spaces. So as a new professional, it can be challenging, right? How do you have some of those conversations with your boss? How do you let them know, hey, I was just doom scrolling on Twitter and Instagram for the past 2 days, over the weekend or the long weekend, and now I have all of this in my mind, and I don't necessarily know how to show up coming into work on Monday, knowing that a lot of these people know what's going on, but are they going to speak to it? And are we going to have a conversation where I feel safe, where I can authentically share how I'm feeling, and am I going to be supported in this space? It's hard, right? Especially as a new professional, if you do not have that relationship with your supervisor or your manager. For me, one of the best things to do is to seek out a peer, somebody else within the organization that even if they don't share your marginalized identity, there's somebody that can relate to you and definitely uses that inclusive language like Joel was speaking to earlier, that you can have some of those conversations with. Because when you show up at work, you are who you are. You can't necessarily turn that off. As much as we may kind of give some of that white glove service and we may, turn up a little bit of our professionalism, we still kind of are who we are. I think that in my organization specifically with Booz Allen Hamilton, they've done a really good job of showing us what training resources they already have, maybe amping some of those up for some of the employers that we're currently working with, showcasing to our clients, hey, this is the training that we're doing on our end. Are you guys providing that to your employees as well? So that way we can make sure that this is a circle and not just kind of like a half oval where some of us are getting some of this extra training, but it's not really fully closing the loop. My organization has made, large sum donations to Black Lives Matter, to different funds that really do support, those boots on the ground. And I think that one, being able to do a little bit of research about an organization, maybe before you join it or while you're there, just to see what kind of efforts they have been doing and seeing if those are things that you align with is going to be really key, if that really means a lot to you. I know as somebody with, a marginalized identity, it can be easy to start to navigate the space and try to take yourself out of it, right? Like you come to work, you do the work, and then when you leave, you get to be yourself. But that's not realistic, especially now that we have this COVID environment where we're working from home and work is becoming more and more integrated with our lives. So I would just say that when it comes to diversity and inclusion and being a new professional, my biggest takeaways would be to research the organization and see what kind of things that they've been doing on their end. Check in to see what kind of trainings there are, trainings that you can access, trainings that your leadership is accessing to make sure that they are kind of on their P's and Q's when it comes to communicating, about the current climate that we're living in. And, also making sure to take care of yourself and to advocate for yourself and to give yourself that space if you need it. I know it can be challenging and a little bit scary as a new professional, but you have to advocate for yourself no matter what group you live or exist in. You must speak on, hey, I need a day because there's a lot of things going on in the environment. If you guys aren't open to talking about that, I completely understand, but this is what I need for me so I can show up and continue to be as productive and as helpful and as give this organization all of the tools that I have in my resource. And that's kind of what I would say. But I would love to hear from Joel or Evelyn about what your organizations are doing or just some of your advice as well.
Yeah, so I think Ilea really brought up two extremely important points that I think everyone here should really reflect on. And that is the concept of authenticity in terms of not only how are you choosing to show up to work, but also how is your organization reinforcing or even discouraging how you might want to show up to work. And I also think the second point that I really want to hone in on is also really that value of evaluating how seriously an organization might consider or take diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so just to kind of go on that second point first, I think that when you do come from an overlooked community, of course, I think that we all face different sorts of challenges. And at the end of the day, it is kind of a personal decision that you have to reconcile in terms of how many challenges or how much do you want to face when you enter into a workplace. And I think that's probably the number one question you're going to have to ask yourself, whether you're a person of color, whether you're a woman, whether you're Black, Asian American, and so on and so forth. And I think kind of based off that honest answer in terms of, I really need an inclusive workplace, to even answers like, I can deal with a workplace that is potentially becoming more inclusive, you'll kind of have a good idea of the sorts of organizations you might want to pursue. And then I think when kind of assessing whether an organization is inclusive, I think it starts even all the way before you apply. What does their website look like? How are they really representing individuals from overlooked communities? Absolutely no insult to UMD, but does it kind of look like a classic brochure where there is literally one person of color, oftentimes depicted on the front page to represent all diversity? And so even from that offset, what does that kind of look like? And then when you get into conversations with interviewers, some questions that I found extremely illuminating have been, in your job, asking when the interviewer says, okay, like, now is the time to really ask me questions. What can I answer for you? So everybody likes to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, when it comes time to defining it, that's a very different answer. So I think the first thing that you could lead with is, what is your organization's definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then I think as a follow-up, in your job, how have you personally learned to be more inclusive, and how have you seen that change your work? And if you're really trying to match up and really see whether a company's values live up to kind of the words that they're putting out, then if anything, you could also ask, potentially, depending on the conversation, not saying that this question may work all the time, but has there ever been a time when your organization may have chosen profits over, or revenue over, the company's values? And I think based off your answers to those questions, or the answers that you get, you'll have a pretty clear idea in terms of where a company might be in its own journey towards becoming more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so all of that said, I think number one, really reflect on, what does it mean for you to show up to work? How do you want to show up? Because that draws the boundary for you. And then number two, with those specific questions, ask very detailed questions like the ones I just asked, in order to get a sense of how people are really addressing this, or whether this is something performative and they're really just doing this in order to really look good, in all honesty. Because I've seen a lot of companies really thrive in this space where they have posted a statement of support for Black Lives Matter, but at the end of the day, they're still falling flat on internal efforts to actually promote Black lives and promote the professional development of the Black community within their workplaces, which is very disappointing. And I've seen some organizations actually take very honest steps. And I think last but not least, if you get into an organization, you don't need to be a DEI professional or have that title to incorporate that into your work. So let's say that you're a project manager and you're doing onboarding, like an HR specialist. How are you taking into consideration persons with disabilities and also parents, in which onboarding probably affects them a lot because they might operate by a different schedule? Let's say you're a software developer. How are you making your product more inclusive for persons with disabilities within your product roadmap? When you're a recruiter, how are you making sure to use language that is not gendered within your job descriptions? And so think of the very concrete ways within your job that you can apply that lens, so you can be inclusive towards everyone. And I'll let Evelyn go because I could probably, again, speak on this for a long, long, long time. However, I want to make sure that she gets her opinions in as well.
Thanks, Joel. And I was actually, jotting down some notes as you were talking about this.
I was like, these are good interview questions.
Oh, really though. And on that note, on interviewing, as I've interviewed candidates and searched for candidates throughout this time for our openings, there have been a lot of questions come up about, how does your organization handle racial justice and things like that. And I think it's becoming more and more important to ask these questions. So thank you for, sharing such detailed and detailed questions that our our students can be asking as they're job searching. And so I also wanted to touch on the inclusion part of like parents and flexibility. That has come up time and time again during this time at COVID. And I think my organization has done such a great job with flexibility in terms of, with everyone and with parents as they're onboarding as well. I've hired a handful of individuals who started off at a part-time basis until they figured out their childcare. So I think that is really important to consider as you're going into a workplace. Maybe you don't need that flexibility, but see how the employers are gauging that type of question you might have. Maybe you are dealing with school and things like that too. So I think that's really important. And so when it comes to how my organization has been handling racial justice, it was so impressive. Right after what had happened with George Floyd, my leadership had called an impromptu meeting for everyone to just have an open forum to really communicate on how are you feeling and, just reactions, to really give a space for people to just be, and whether it's just to listen to what others have to say or really just express their feelings. I personally did not say a word. I just really needed the space to deal with my emotions and also just hear from others, especially my, other colleagues of color. And I think it was very, eye-opening for everyone to just really sit there and listen. And so I found that to be really incredible that our leadership had, just called on this meeting to really be together. I think it really helped a lot of us. We're trudging along, going to work, the next day because we're just at home, right? And dealing with all of these emotions. And I think it's also really important, what I believe it was what Joel said. I don't remember that, if you don't have a supervisor that you can really talk to about this stuff, maybe relying on a peer, or maybe I had said that, but I thought that was really important to say because, day to day you're going to work dealing with these emotions. And I was lucky enough to have an HR team that really allowed a space in our weekly meeting to really talk about these things too. So internally at my organization, they have opened up like a leadership group for racial justice to start these communications. How can we be more racially just in our organization? And funny enough, we had just had the first meeting right before our call today to really be an open forum again, to really just talk about what's going on and figure out, what next steps are for our org. So I don't want to talk too long because I know we're close to the end. So I'll pass it back to Alin.
It's clear these are such important conversations to be had that we could continue on and on and on. Maybe there'll be a part two. But I want to open the floor in case anyone in our audience has a question they would like to ask of the panel. You are welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question, or if you feel more comfortable, you're also welcome to put it in the chat.
I have two questions. I'm Anthony Brown. I'm a 2018 Maryland grad, English language and literature. I have two questions. What are your thoughts on mentorship as a new hire, and how do you navigate finding one or a few, if possible, within the company? That's my first question.
And I will open, yeah, go for it, yes.
Hi, Anthony. At my organization, they have like set kind of mentorship programs. And so some organizations, whether they're large or small, they kind of have them built in. So they'll identify maybe somebody that's mid-career or senior, and they'll have you maybe meet up with them once or twice a month. So that way you can ask them questions and see if there's anything that you need from them. Or even sometimes they want to get perspective from you as a new hire, like you're the boots on the ground. So they want to know what's really going on. Do you have any fresh perspective that maybe people within the supervisory levels aren't listening to? So those built-in mentorship programs are pretty good. In terms of navigating and trying to find your own mentors, I'm not going to lie, when we were pre-COVID, I was the person that walked around the office for the first hour of work. So that way I could get to know my colleagues and see what they were doing. Because many times you actually got to learn about, oh, well, I'm actually really connected to this person and I didn't know it because we like the same music, or we like to cook the same foods, or we shop at the same grocer and enjoy the same organic apples, right? And so you start to build those little connections with people, and then you start to actually get advice from them, whether it's about your personal life or things within the workplace. And a lot of times those people end up being your allies when you want to talk compensation later on, maybe 6 months or a year down the road, when you want to talk about professional development and other things that you would like to have, you know, from your organization that you know they have the ability to give you, but you may not be sure exactly how to ask for those things. And so especially again in this virtual space, if you can, you know, tag up with somebody for 10 or 15 minutes just for a phone call to ask them, you know, you are, you know, the project manager, you're a senior executive in this space, you know, can you tell me a little bit about what your experience has been like at this organization, or if you've been a senior leader at other organizations, what made that different for you? And I think just starting off with some of those basic questions are going to help you build that trust with that leadership, and then you'll be able to kind of create your own mentorship.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And my second question for anybody in the panel who wants to answer it, I've heard that having a 30, 60, 90-day plan is very beneficial to being productive in a role. Is it worthwhile bringing it up in the during the interview process or during the onboarding process with your direct report?
Yeah, I can chime in here. I think, Anthony, either option works. I think if you kind of wanted to get a sense of, all right, how prepared is this organization going to be if I were to go into it? I think you can ask that question during the interview process in terms of, you know, let's say I were to get this position, what would a 30, 60, 90 onboarding plan look like? And what are the immediate priorities? And then I think that as you enter into the organization, it should absolutely be on the plate of your manager to actually think that through, because you're still learning about the organization, and at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. So it should be on their plate, and definitely encourage you to proactively bring it up if they have another system, or like if something works better for you, but they should kind of be tailoring their onboarding style to your learning and your needs, if that makes sense.
No, great, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, I had a whole list that I didn't get through. And so maybe the ask will be on the table that we do this again in the spring, because it was such rich discussion. You all are such troves of information and wisdom. We so appreciate you taking time and space to join us here back at Maryland to share your insights, your perspectives, your lessons learned, where you fell short. I think those pieces are just as valuable as all the things that you know, all the things that you didn't know, and the ways in which you took the time to learn and ask and to fall forward, right? To figure it out, to move forward. So help me all thank our panelists, Ilea, Evelyn, and Joel.